So I want to start with a confession that I have to make. I am not a technologist or a new media expert. In fact, I'm more drawn to an oral storytelling tradition than I am to the latest digital media platform. But I've spent a lot of time thinking about this world of new literacy as it relates to new media, and I'd like to share an observation to start and then a story. It occurs to me that technology and communication evolve not for commercial interests, but they evolve to respond to a basic human need that we all share. That's the need to tell our story. When we see injustice in the world, or we see a beautiful sunset, not that we saw one last night, but when we do, what we want to do is we want to take somebody and we want to put them into our body. We want them to see what we see. We want them to feel what we feel. We want them to experience what we experience. We haven't yet figured out as a species how to do that, so we've created language and technology and communication to come as close as we can to an unmediated experience. If we were at the New Media Consortium 1,000 years ago, we would be talking about words as code, and we'd be talking about pens as technology. But we're not. We're here today. And we're here at this moment in time where for the first time there's this confluence of the tools of creation of images and the tools of distribution that allow us to share our stories across the globe and as direct and as unmediated a way as possible. Let me tell you a story. I was recently in the Middle East, and I had an opportunity to meet this man, Fadi. Fadi lives in this cave. Here we are inside the cave, and this is his son. His son was born in this cave, as was Fadi, as was his father, and his father before him. And he talked about the problems he had in the region with settlers and the army and all kinds of things. But he found in recent years a new tool. He began working with a human rights organization. And as he's telling us about this new tool, he reaches behind him and he pulls out a camera. And he starts talking about the stories that he's created and shot language and how editing something together tells a story that's so powerful and it's actually changed his reality. So you ask, why are images so powerful? And it really relates to the physiology of our brains. I had the chance over the last couple of years while writing this book to travel around the world, meeting with neuroscientists and talking about how we see images. It turns out that the brain, that seeing is a creative act. In fact, it's one of the most creative acts that we do, and we do it constantly, at more than 24 times a second. Every time we see an image, it's actually data that's brought in, and we're creating it relative to a database that we've created through past experience. Over 1 million neurons are fired with each image that we take in and we see in our mind's eye. And many of those images are mirror neurons, which Marco Iacoboni at UCLA talks about as being the neurons that relate to empathy. So it's no surprise that the images that we see and that we experience are as close physiologically to an unmediated experience. When we see somebody being chased across the screen, our heart rate increases and we feel it. I had the opportunity to have my brain studied in an MRI machine while watching video. I watched a clip from the old movie Soylent Green. I watched 2 trailers from a Hollywood movie, and then I watched a 4th piece created by our students. And I want to show you that piece. This is just a short clip from a movie called Anna.
I grew up in Santiago. My family was all involved in politics. They were all very involved in the change of the country. I believed in their ideals. I was very young when I was given the Communist Manifesto. So it became very difficult for a few of us, and we were given a choice. And one of the choices was to leave. I have longed for Chile forever. You know, there's not a day that go by that I don't remember that I'm Chilean. You know, and people don't realize that, yes, this is your country. I have never said that it isn't. I don't want to change your country. But I want you to know that I long for mine, just like you long for yours. I want to help you make yours better, but I still love mine.
Seeing is a creative act, and so is taking meaning from a series of images that are juxtaposed together. So ultimately, it's about language, and it's about literacy. Marjorie Garber, the Harvard professor who wrote The Use and Abuse of Literature, talks about literature having to pass several tests. One of them that is that it relates to a body of work that precedes it. The second is that it's open to interpretation, that we're allowed to have our own experience of it, that it's not something that's just didactic and trying to share information. So there are some unique aspects to this form of language and literacy. And as educators, what we need to do is to express what some of those basic building blocks are. And I'd like to offer three very basic ones. The first is composition. Marty Scorsese, who wrote the foreword to my book, talks about cinema as being a question of what's in the frame and what's not. So every choice we make about what we choose to frame, and that's true of what we see and also what we capture in images. The second is the idea of camera as audience. We have this amazing ability to change perspectives, to move with the camera, and all of that creates meaning. But ultimately, in terms of the construction of moving images, the third thing, and maybe the most powerful, is around editing, or the construction of images. Kuleshov, in the 1920s, a Russian film professor, created an experiment that juxtaposed images to show that two images that have disparate meanings come together to create a third. And the great Alfred Hitchcock talks about this as well.
Now, the third way is what one might call pure cinematics, the assembly of film, and how it can be changed to create a different idea. Now, we have a close-up. Let me show what he sees. Let's assume he saw a woman holding a baby in her arms. Now we cut back to his reaction to what he sees, and he smiles. Now, what is he as a character? He's a kindly man. He's sympathetic. Now, let's take the middle piece of film away, the woman with the child, but leave his two pieces of film as they were. Now we'll put in a piece of film of a girl in a bikini. He looks, girl in a bikini, he smiles. What is he now? The dirty old man. He's no longer the benign gentleman who loves babies. That's the difference. That's what film can do for you.
Or you for it, as it were.
Alfred Hitchcock. So the screens are exploding around us. We passed this crazy moment in the fourth quarter of 2011, and it's the moment at which there were more iPhones born into this world than babies. We all carry around with us a phone that has the ability not only to view images, but to create images. YouTube, which we're all, of course, familiar with, YouTube uploads we upload to YouTube in every month more than was created by the three major networks since their inception more than 60 years ago. Images are everywhere. So you're saying, yeah, but there's a lot of stuff like this on YouTube. And you'd be right. More than 30 million people have watched this video. Some of them your students, and some of them you. And that may make you wonder about our culture and our society. It certainly does me. However, it's not that long ago. Remember, this language of cinema is only 100 years ago. And if we were to go back to the origins of cinema, which was cinema of spectacle, with William Friese Greene in the UK, and the Lumiere brothers in France, and Thomas Edison here in the United States, and you might find an Edison clip like this. So some of you may be pessimistic that we're still in the age of stupid cat videos. But I actually see this as being very optimistic. I think that we're at this moment where we are in the place that Edison was 100 years ago. We're learning how to capture images, we're learning how to entertain each other, and we're learning how to distribute them. So it's a very, very important moment. There's clearly going to be some anxiety, though, as educators and as parents in terms of the role of images. I take you back thousands of years ago to Socrates, who said to Phaedrus, written down by Plato, who bemoaned the fact that by beginning to write, we would be losing our wisdom and our intellect. You could go back to the Victor Hugo novel of the 1830s, written about the 15th century in the Gutenberg press, who talked about it being the demise of France. You could watch that movie, the 20th century movie, delivered in 21st century form on YouTube. But ultimately, the classroom needs to respond to the world our kids are growing up in. And it is about literacy, and it is about story. From the smallest of stories, this is A Boy and His Atom. This is an animated film. And every pixel you see here is actually an atom. Ultimately, it's from the smallest of stories to the biggest of stories. I went around and I asked a number of people what was the most important image to them. And people offered a variety of different creative ideas, from different paintings to a self-image. But ultimately, one image that many, many people came up with, and that I also feel is one of the most important images, came about from the 1970s, when in an Apollo spaceship, we were able to actually take the camera that we had pointed out to the heavens and turn it around and look at the Earth. There are many problems that we're dealing with, many problems that keep us up at night, many global threats. Yet ultimately, we're also at this extraordinary moment in time. This is the first time in human history that we can get back around a campfire and tell each other stories, do it in a powerful and a compelling and an emotional way. And I believe that ultimately it's about story that begins to solve those problems. I wanted to share with you one last piece of media. Ultimately, as I said, I'm a traditionalist and not about the technology. We have a program that culminated, the semester culminated yesterday from Brookside Elementary School in Ossining, where we've been working with students to document the natural world around their playground in their schools, to understand that they can look closely and see story and drama in the world around them. They found that they share their playground with coyotes and with herons, with bobcats, with foxes. And we did this program together with someone who's been connected with our faculty for the last 12 years, a wonderful nature cinematographer, Andy Young. And he shared with them as an aspirational video some work he had just done filming right around our home. And I wanted to share with you because I think it's also a metaphor for what we need to be thinking about as educators here in the 21st century. This is from a documentary called The Original Duckumentary, and it's also about birds, another theme that came up this morning. And it's about these wood ducks. This is taken in a pond right near the film center. All the species that share this pond. So wood ducks come here every year to lay their eggs. And actually, where they lay their eggs is they choose to find a hole in a tree, oftentimes very, very high up in the tree. This hole is 70 feet up. And these hatchlings were born one day early. It turns out that on the first day of life for wood ducks, their mother leaves the nest. She flies to a distant place, and she begins to call them. They have special claws that allow them on the first day of life to climb up from the hole. They get to the edge, and they look down. You might say that they need to take what we'd call a leap of faith. So like the wood ducks, we need to listen carefully, trust our intuition, hear the call. And embrace all the ways in which we connect to each other and to the natural world in telling our stories. It's a really important image for us to walk away from, and ultimately to think deeply about our role, not just as educators, but as storytellers, and how to use this extraordinarily powerful and unique storytelling medium to express ourselves in as powerful and as compelling a way as possible. Thank you very much.